Hi guys. So as you know, and you've been seeing my messages and my announcements, you got your test today, and so I want to do a quick review. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through all of the things that are on the study outline that I uploaded and put on Canvas. So if you've got that study outline, I'm going to follow through with that, and then if you have questions, while I'm going through any of that, just type them in the chat box, and I'll be happy to answer. But before I get to all that, there are a few announcements or things that I want to mention. One is, like I said, the test, I'm going to publish it to be live as soon as we're done with this. And it closes tomorrow at noon. So the Kahoot is live now, and you can play it as a challenge. The link is in Canvas, and you can play it as many times as you want. Last time I used the exact same questions for Kahoot as I did for your test, since we were really new to this entire situation and I wanted to go easy on you, so I made it literally the exact same, nothing different, and everybody did really well, and I was very pleased with the test, so good job. This time it is a little bit different. I have added more. There are plenty of questions that are on the test that are not on the Kahoot, and then there are some that are reworded. I might add, phrase the question from the answer's perspective instead of the question's perspective for what you've seen on the Kahoot. So, but if you do the Kahoot and you do well on it, then honestly, you're going to be fine for the test. Next thing I was going to say is all your work for the week is due tomorrow. Don't forget, tomorrow's Friday, so all your stuff is due then. The only thing that is not due then is the test, which is due at noon. All the other work is due at midnight or 11:59. Next week, I'm going to be changing that a little bit. For the most part, you guys are doing well at pacing yourself in terms of your work, but this week has been hard for all three of my classes. I've noticed people are starting to get a little further off and are more procrastinating. So next week, instead of saying Friday everything's due, I'll post plenty of it, and I'll have two due dates, Wednesday and Friday. So Monday and Tuesday's work will be due Wednesday, and then Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday's work will be due Friday. So I'm going to try to break it into two chunks to help you not procrastinate and not try to wait till the last minute. If you wait till Friday to try to do 5 days worth of work, that's going to be difficult, especially for those of you who have college classes, or if you're in AP English. It's a lot to balance. It's not necessary. I'm really, all the work I'm giving you is pretty simple. So, and none of it should take a long amount of time. As long as you're, some of it might not even take normally what we would spend in class. So as long as you're staying on top of your work, it'll be fine. And then the last thing is, I don't know anything. Several of you have asked me about senior stuff. Several of you have asked me about Power School. I know nothing more than what you know, which is nothing. We're waiting to hear things from the county at this point. They've been in meetings all week. I know they had a big meeting yesterday to talk about it. So whenever we know something, we'll send it out. I'm sure Ms. Keels will send an email, or the superintendent will. But definitely when I know something, I will send in the remind. And I'll probably post that as an announcement on Canvas too. So just, keep your eyes on all forms of communication, and we'll let you know when there's something to know. Okay, now I'm going to get to the review sheet. And I think I'm going to keep doing it this way. Whenever we do your next test, I'll keep doing a live review, and I'll post the Kahoot and the review sheet. Also, well, I think I'm just going to phase out quizzes. I don't really see a point. Since you are taking your test online at home and you're able to, you have all your materials there with you, I don't necessarily think we need to do quizzes from time being. But, that being said, if you want to, I do have quizzes for those units. So if you want to FaceTime me one day and have me quiz you orally as practice, just to help get an idea of what the questions are going to be on the test or anything, you can totally ask me to do that, and I have no problem with that at all. Okay, so this unit started with the progressive era, and I talked about 4 areas of the progressive movement that women were involved in specifically. The first was immigrant help. And that was Jane Addams founding the settlement house, Hull House in Chicago, and all of the things that Hull House was, the purpose of that. Make sure you understand that. I talked about child labor and the formation of the Child Labor Committee. Julia Lathrop and Florence Kelly being those like child labor leaders, even though, there wasn't really like there was hardcore legislation made to end child labor, but it didn't stand, right? The Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional. So we won't actually end child labor until the New Deal during the Great Depression. Then I talked about industrial reform. You could consider child labor industrial reform, but the main component of industrial reform is really trust busting and cracking down on companies that were too powerful and, using illegal business practices. So the woman you should definitely know for that would be Ida Tarbell, who published The History of Standard Oil. Since we're not in class, I can't show you any drunk histories, sadly, but there is a drunk history on Ida Tarbell. I think it's in the journalism episode. No, it's in the underdogs episode. So if you have Hulu yourself, pop over to the drunk history and find the episode on underdogs and fast forward to where they start talking about Ida Tarbell, and they go through the whole experience with her publishing, how she got all the information about Standard Oil and what they end up doing to J.D. Rockefeller afterwards, which is forcing him to split his one company into two separate companies, both of which remained like billion-dollar industry. So the Rockefellers were okay. That was just, I guess, a step in the right direction. And then the last thing I talked about was the Spanish influenza. Ironic, since we're in the middle of, our next global pandemic. But the main connection to women that the Spanish influenza has is women in medicine and the opportunities that it opened for women in medicine, since not only were we facing this like huge pandemic at the time where millions of people were killed, but also it was in the middle of World War, or in the middle / the end of World War I. So we were needing a lot of doctors and nurses and everybody in the medical field as much as possible. So this opened up more of an opportunity for women to become doctors and women to enlist as nurses and women to serve overseas as nurses. So that's really the main reason why we would connect the Spanish influenza to ladies. But probably the biggest movement for women specifically during this progressive era, aside from like obviously the suffrage movement, which we talked about in Unit 5, would actually be the birth control movement. And so the leader for the birth control movement is Margaret Sanger, Sanger, Sanger. And she had been a nurse and saw these women having problem after problem, and women dying from childbirth and pregnancy complications, or from repeated miscarriages, or either botched illegal abortions. So she decided to devote her life to making sure women got access to birth control. And she violated the Comstock law, which said that you couldn't publish any information about birth control. You couldn't mail birth control. You couldn't mail, a pamphlet about the side effects of a certain form of birth control or proper usage or anything like that. No one could. And because it was considered obscene. And so she did it anyway. She published her own magazine called the Birth Control Review, where she published articles about birth control and different forms and proper methods and access and things like that. And so, of course, she had to flee to Europe for a while because she violated the law. She was going to get arrested. Eventually, she did come home and did get arrested. When she got out of prison, she only served for like a month. But when she got out of jail, she formed the Brownsville Clinic, which later ended up being Planned Parenthood. But eventually, Margaret and one of her doctors at the Brownsville Clinic got some real success when one of their cases made it to the Supreme Court, which was US v. One Package. And in US v. One Package, the Supreme Court said that you can you being a doctor can mail information about birth control. Like private citizens cannot, still can't, like some random woman can't stand out on the street with like a pamphlet, come learn about birth control, or come to this, condom demonstration or something, but they can, a doctor can, you can go, or you can call a clinic and say, I want a doctor to mail me a pamphlet about birth control. And that's perfectly allowed. So that was a big case, and we're still going to see lack of accessibility, especially for women of color and low income women. Those were still going to be primarily the women who are going to not have access, even aside from this new Supreme Court case. But we'll see that start to shift once we get to like the 60s and 70s. So, it'll take another 40 years. Then I talked about women in World War I. The two big jobs you should know for World War I are yeoman, which with the F in parentheses, which is, non-commissioned female officers for the military, specifically for the Navy. So they did everything from, they were paid soldier's wage almost, but they're not in combat, and they're being non-commissioned. They're not given a rank. So they're not really in the military, but they're basically in the military. So this is like one of the, when we get to World War II, we'll see more of that. Outside of the Navy, we'll see like in the Army and the Coast Guard and every other branch. But right here, these yeomen were just naval non-commissioned officers. And then the other primary job that women are going to have is hello girls, which are the telephone operators, called hello girls for obvious reasons. If you don't get that, we got bigger issues. Women definitely led the anti-war movement. We talked a little bit about that during the suffrage unit and all of those things when I talked about how they didn't put the suffrage movement on hold, but NASA and other organizations definitely worked for the anti-war movement and volunteered for the Red Cross. We see like the YMCA and the YWCA and groups like that, trying to push for the anti-war movement. And Jeanette Rankin was probably the most famous and one of the most outspoken anti-war advocates. She was the only woman in Congress, remember? And then along with her, Jane Addams, the woman who had Hull House. And that's one of the reasons why she'll end up winning the Nobel Peace Prize, is because of her work to end the world wars. Propaganda, you did your whole propaganda analysis. So you should be able to explain how and why women were depicted in propaganda. But the three primary ways are being used as symbols of like freedom or liberty, or, these like broad democratic ideals. The second would be used as like a sympathetic tool. So, like I think one of them had like a sad Belgian woman looking like she was starving or something with her children. So like women and children were often used to evoke sympathy for our allies overseas. And then third is propaganda to target women specifically and say like, we need you to get this wartime job. We need you to support the war effort specifically. So you should be able to explain those ways. Then I got into the 1920s and talked about, flappers and the new woman and what makes her the new woman. Really, the new woman is just this new younger generation of women who are more like financially independent and pursuing, whatever it is that they want. And it's not necessarily sexual liberation. We're not going to see that till we get to the 1970s. But there's certainly more of, it's not really accepted by society, but at least among these women, it's more accepted that women can, do whatever they want, sort of. And so we see that like pushback in beauty standards. So instead of like long hair and a curvy body, it's short hair and a straight body, trying to like be the opposite of the older generation before them. For Black women in the 1920s, I talked about Ada McKinley founding the South Side Settlement House, which was essentially just like the Hull House, but it was for Black women and Black families in Chicago. Nothing like that existed really for Black women in America. There was all this help for immigrants, but not really for the people at home who needed it. So Ada McKinley started her settlement house for that reason. And then I talked about Madam C.J. Walker being the first female self-made millionaire in the world. And on top of that, she was a Black woman. She made her money in hair and scalp care. Why was this all women or only wealthy women? Well, what women? Do you mean like with the hair, or who? Who is all women or all wealthy women? Be specific. Also, there's a delay, so when you type something, it'll take a few seconds for it to pop up on my end before I can see it. Flappers, all women. Yeah, there were. It was, of course, harder for a really low income woman to participate in that lifestyle because most of those women worked, but there were definitely all range of income of women who would be considered like the new woman. Yes. Definitely not just wealthy women. Because everyone wanted to fit in, and be part of that new like society. But like I said, Madam C.J. Walker, if you haven't watched the new series on Netflix, it's very, very good. I would recommend it. If you watch it, write me a little summary or something. I'll give you extra credit. I can't even remember what the name of it is off the top of my head right now, but it's about Madam C.J. Walker's life. It's like 6 episodes, and she's played by Octavia Spencer. I know y'all got nothing but time now, so give it a watch if you're looking for something new and you would like a little extra credit. Never hurt anybody. And she mostly used all of her money to like invest back in the Black community. She started, scholarships I talked about for HBCUs, and she sat on the board of the New York NAACP and things like that. Then is World War II. I went over, what you should really understand about World War II is like the differences in how women were involved in World War II in terms of working compared to World War I. The major differences are in World War II, we've got way more married women working, way more middle-aged and older women working, and women are holding more of those like white collar jobs or jobs that would be considered traditionally more masculine, not even necessarily just like factory work that would be considered more masculine, but management positions that would be considered like normally only a man would do this because only men can lead. Well, women started to get more jobs like that too. And then in terms of combat, what you should know is that now there is like really for the first time, like a lot of opportunities for women to get involved in the actual war itself. Your only options weren't a yeoman or a hello girl. Now you have dozens of options. Women could enlist in the Army Nurse Corps, the WACs, the WASPs. They flew planes, they drove ambulances, they did all sorts of stuff, training missions, spies, everything. So there's definitely way more opportunity for women home front and abroad in World War II than we see in World War I. And then and the baseball, of course, All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. Had we been in class, I would have showed you the movie A League of Their Own, which is so good. And I'm very sorry that you didn't get to see it. But, same as the Octavia Spencer, C.J. Walker thing. If you watch it, let me know and I'll email you the work. It's like one little sheet. I'll email it to you and you can fill it out while you watch it and I'll give you extra credit. Who doesn't love extra credit? All right. So then after the war, we know women were laid off, fired in droves because they were pressured / encouraged / forced to give up their jobs because all the men were coming home. And the idea was like, well, we need men to work because they have families to support. Women don't need to work. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. Because women have families as well. And it shouldn't really matter if you have a family or not. Like anyone should be entitled to the job. So we're shifting back into this like, oh, that wartime was just, that was temporary. Now we got to get back to normal. Let's get back to mom in the kitchen in her heels and pearls looking like June Cleaver, like ready to bake an apple pie or something. We want to get back to that. And because of all the opportunity that women saw and experienced during both world wars, really, but especially World War II, they were like, that sucks. Like, we've seen what it can be like. Let's continue down that road. And that's going to open the door for this new second wave. So what starts the second wave? Betty Friedan's book, right? There were some moments before that, like the FDA approval of Inovid, which was the first oral contraceptive pill. Contraceptive means birth control. I had a couple people ask me that, to be clear. Contraceptive means birth control. And Inovid was the first FDA-approved pill. And so even though that happened in 1960 and Betty Friedan's book didn't come out until after that, we still would consider and birth control is, of course, a big moment for the second wave. It just because it came out didn't mean like a million women were going to be prescribed birth control. And this is still just for married women, right? We're not even, Griswold v. Connecticut legalizes birth control for all married women, not all single women. So we'll see that in the 60s, and then single women won't get access to total access to birth control until the 1970s. So definitely know the court cases I talked about. Griswold v. Connecticut being one, Eisenstadt v. Baird being one, Roe v. Wade, any of those ones that I talked about, and make sure you're looking at that like graphic organizer that I put up. That'll be a good way to sort of keep everything straight. Understand what the ERA is, what the goal of it was, who was for and who was against it. Phyllis Schlafly being the anti-ERA lady. She's the one that had the big stop ERA stop sign on her chest. And her reasons were essentially that it would like ruin the American family, and which would lead to like the destruction of society, right? It would trigger the apocalypse if we granted an amendment to give equal rights to women. But on top of that, the people who were for the ERA was overwhelmingly the entire women's movement, but one of the most vocal advocates and who testified before Congress was Gloria Steinem, the same woman who worked for the Playboy Club and wrote that expose. There is also a drunk history on Gloria Steinem doing her Playboy Bunny undercover work and publishing her report. And I think that the episode is called Sex. So, and there's some stuff in that episode that we'll even talk about when we talk about gay liberation in the next unit. So if you watched really, the whole episode, you might see quite a few things that pertain to this. I know Margaret Sanger also has a piece of an episode, and it could be that one, but I'm not 100% sure. So aside from the ERA, no major publications like The Feminine Mystique and A Bunny's Tale. And you should also know Sex and Caste, which was that publication by those women who interviewed groups like SDS and people in the civil rights movement and published about all of this discrimination within these other smaller social movement groups, how women were being discriminated against, even among groups that considered themselves to be progressive. So that's what Sex and Caste was about. Major people and major groups now, the Red Stockings, the Lavender Menace, Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan, and Valerie Solanas are probably the only three feminists that I talk about. Valerie Solanas is the woman who wrote Scum. I hope that you enjoyed the reading of Scum. It's pretty hilarious. I would be shocked if anyone read the whole thing unless you just like were bored and went down the rabbit hole. It's kind of long, but it is a wild ride if you read the whole thing. But make sure you understand the overall message of Scum, which was exactly what the title is: Sisters or Society for Cutting Up Men. It is hilarious, honestly. It's a good laugh. And the whole like mantra that she came up with that men needed to recite, of course Alia did, the mantra that she came up with for the men to recite about like, I'm a turd, a lowly turd. I mean, that makes me laugh every time. She was wild and clearly walked the walk as she talked the talk, because she tried to kill Andy Warhol. So she must have meant it on some level. So I think those are the only names that I specifically ask you in terms of feminists, and then Phyllis as an anti-feminist. But make sure that you also understand the differences between conservative, liberal, and radical feminism. Conservative feminism would be a group that supports like women in the workplace, but not necessarily trying to advocate for birth control or abortion rights, and definitely not a group that would support lesbian or LGBT women. Radical feminism would be liberal feminism would be a group like Now, who is advocating for equality in the workplace with reproductive rights and all of that. But as you saw in the she's beautiful when she's angry video. They weren't exactly inclusive of LGBT women or women of color. And so that those would be considered liberal feminists. And then radical feminists would be a group like Red Stockings, who was inclusive of all those groups and was pushing for sexual liberation of women, full reproductive rights, encouraging involvement from the LGBT community, all of the above. So that's what radical feminism is. I don't want to necessarily say that Valerie Solanas and Scum would be radical feminism, although they would. But they're their own thing because she was crazy. Non-crazy, actually good and helpful radical feminist group that you could mention would be Red Stockings. And then understand the ultimate divide and breakup of the second wave, which came from those feminist sex wars. A conservative feminist, I wouldn't say, see, that's the thing. You could argue that Phyllis Schlafly was a conservative feminist, but I would not. In terms of the only group that I would mention there would be that that group out of New York. It should be in your notes. I don't remember the name off the top of my head. Let me look really fast so I don't give you the wrong thing. All of their names, sound so similar. But like I said, I wouldn't argue that Phyllis is a conservative feminist, although today the definition of conservative feminism has changed because feminism has changed. Today, when we talk about conservative feminism, it's mostly like anti-feminism, essentially. The Women's Equity Action League, that was the group out of New York that would be considered a conservative feminist group. Women's Equity Action League. That's a good conservative group to mention. So like I said, the Feminist Sex Wars, which was basically saying that women, the feminist movement couldn't agree on if they wanted to take a pro or con stance on women in pornography. Does it objectify women and degrade women, or does it uplift women and encourage them to own their own bodies? Because of that divide, the whole thing sort of began to fizzle out when we got into the 80s. And then we'll see the third wave emerge in the early 1990s, 1990, 1991. So goals of the third wave, things that were similar and different. The third wave was definitely, one of the big criticisms of the third wave was that or several criticisms would be its lack of cohesion. There were people who were outspoken and people that you would think of when you think of the third wave, like Anita Hill. But she wasn't necessarily she didn't set out to be like, we're going to have this third wave of feminism. And there were groups, like VDay and the Riot Girls, but there weren't necessarily, there wasn't a group like Now or Red Stockings or these groups that were working to try to affect legal change necessarily on a large scale. A lot of it was grassroots movement. So it was kind of intended to be less cohesive than the two previous waves of feminism. So that's definitely something that differentiates them, as you probably saw when you did your comparison graphic organizer. But their overall goals were to talk about violence against women, and that's whether it be domestic violence, sexual harassment, anything like that, that all goes under the category of violence against women. And the fourth wave of feminism that we're in now, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the last unit, Unit 9, which is current events. Then we'll talk about the fourth wave, which we're living. But their main goal is just to talk about violence against women. That's really the only thing going on in the fourth wave. While that was a goal and issue of the third wave, it was not the only one. They were also focusing on inclusivity. They were focusing on reclaiming derogatory terms against women. So there were a lot of other issues that they were talking about, but we're going to see violence against women and the Me Too movement really be the dominating factor going into the fourth wave. So that's different. Groups you should know, like I mentioned, VDay, which is that violence against women group that the author of the Vagina Monologues founded. And then Riot Girls, and no, it's obvious when you see their name that girls is spelled differently, and it was one of those efforts to like reclaim the word girl, which was another criticism of the movement, that it was like girly feminism and that it was pushing this raunch culture because there was so much pressure, or not necessarily pressure, but like so many conversations about like women owning their sexuality, and there's so much more of that in the 90s, and you can see that honestly when you watch like old 90s movies or listen to 90s music, especially some of that more like punk feminist subculture, not just the Riot Girl group, but groups similar to them. You can definitely hear it. There's one song literally called Bitch. I cannot remember the name of the woman who sang it. I think her name is Meredith something. But the lyrics to that song are like the perfect embodiment of what that whole like reclaiming derogatory terms about women is, and sort of like owning that and what does that mean. And then of course the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill debacle is probably the biggest thing to happen during the third wave of feminism, and one of the early moments in it to spark all those conversations about violence against women, sexual assault, and sexual harassment, which was in 1991 when Clarence Thomas was up for his Supreme Court nomination confirmation, and Anita Hill came forward and said that he had, she came forward because she was asked, because she had previously, her name came up in the investigation because there were several women who had accused him of sexual harassment, but she was the only one that testified, saying that he had sexually harassed her while they were working together for the EEOC. And ultimately, aside from her testimony that she gave before Congress, they still confirmed him, and he still is sitting on the bench today. So, and then I talked about a few other things. Like I said, I mentioned the Vagina Monologues, and a lot of college campuses do this now. If you are a senior and you're going to college next year, or juniors when you get to college, a lot of college campuses host the Vagina Monologues every year. So you probably will see they do their own. So, the original one was written, she performed all of the parts herself and wrote all of the parts herself. But a lot of the ones they do now are sort of like a rewrite where different women will write their own pieces and perform them, like a poetry reading, but like a women-centered, vagina-centered poetry reading, essentially. I know at they did it like twice a year, one in the fall and one in the spring. It was always pretty funny to go to, because a lot of the monologue is like meant to be funny and witty, and it's not necessarily there's definitely some pieces that are more serious, but it's not all meant to be super serious and a downer. There's certainly a lot of pieces that are meant to be like more funny and uplifting. And then like Take Your Daughter to Work Day, moments like that where we see us trying to like encourage a younger generation of women to be like more career focused. Meredith Brooks, thank you for Googling that, who sings that song. A pretty catchy song. It's very 90s music. When you hear it, you're like, oh yes, this is what the 90s sounded like. So like I said, yeah, Take Your Daughter to Work Day. I think that those are pretty much the only things that I test about in terms of the third wave. So I think that covers all of it. But now I'll wait a few minutes and see wait a few seconds and see if anybody has any questions, anything you want me to go back and to explain, anything I didn't cover that you're confused by. Once again, the Kahoot closes at 11 o'clock tonight. The test closes at 12 noon tomorrow, and you can take the Kahoot as many times as you want. I saw last time several of you took the Kahoot several times. That is the way to do it. When you take it, just put your like a number after your name, maybe like just say like your name 1 the first time you take it, and do it a bunch of times, and I'll see. It's interesting to me to see who takes it, who likes to take it a lot of times, who likes to be extra prepared. All right. Any questions at all before we sign off? My dog is growling at something out in the hall. It's been doing that all day. There's nothing out there. All right. So if you tuned in late, make sure that when this is over, you go back and rewind and watch my announcements at the beginning. While you're taking your test, of course, feel free to text me and ask me any questions that you might have, but try not to make it be too late or I won't be able to answer. I do have a bedtime myself, you know. Additionally, your assignments for tomorrow, I'll go ahead and make them live today. So if you finish your test to, right after this and you want to go ahead and get a start on what we're doing tomorrow, you can absolutely do that. And then Monday, I'll go ahead and start posting your stuff for next week. You should be able to see it Monday morning. If you're ever having trouble accessing Canvas, the assignments, submitting them, please just email them to me. I've had a couple people yesterday and this morning who sent me videos. They were trying to upload some things, and every time it would upload, then it would just delete. Like, it just wouldn't save onto Canvas. So if that's happening to you, email it to me. Don't take a late grade if you've done it. Don't wait for Canvas to work. Computers are stupid. So just, email it to me or let me know if you're having problems. I certainly don't want to count anything late for anyone because of a technical error, not because you just sat around at the house and didn't feel like doing anything. If that's why your work is late, then it's going to be kind of late. But if it's, something that's really out of your hands, I'll do my best to take mercy on you, since we are truly living in trying times, the quarantine times. Your test is, you have 60 minutes to take it. It's the same as last time, where when you finish one question, you lock it and you move on to the next one. So don't lollygag, write your answer down and move on. But I did give you a few more minutes last time because I noticed when I was grading them, a couple of people ran out of time. If something happens and you start taking your test and you get to the third question and it locks you out, your internet connection dies, something like that happens, let me know. I had that happen to one person before and we were able to work it out. So definitely let me know that. I won't be able to fix it right away. I'll have to wait till everyone takes their test and I grade them, and then I can, kind of open it back up for you to finish those last few. But make sure that you are sure of your answer and then move on. Don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. This stuff, honestly, you've got your notes right in front of you. It should be pretty simple. Like I said, text me or email me if you've got questions. If you miss me, feel free to FaceTime me during the day. Just let me know if you want to set up a video conference to ask me about whatever. I'm totally ready and willing. This is all I'm doing. But other than that, I will be in touch soon. Good luck on your test. You're going to do fine. Adios.